I would take the approach as an ask the expert. So all of those scary HR thoughts that you're having that you were too afraid to ask, I want you to bring those to me today. The way I'm going to approach this this conversation is I really do want to share with you some of the patterns and trends that we're seeing now that we're, almost 5 weeks into the pandemic. And the government has been doing a phenomenal job. And I've said this before, they're building the airplane while it's flying. And they're taking our feedback, they're acting on our feedback, and they're modifying the programs as best they can to try and integrate all of the folks and how they're affected in all of those different ways. And of course, we're seeing that inside of the organizations that we're working with and that we're supporting throughout this. So many of you have likely heard the perspectives from various employment law firms across the city around the various programs that are available, and certainly some of the employment law considerations that you need to be mindful of, whether you're a federally regulated organization. Most of us are provincially regulated organizations. We've got to be mindful about the practical application of these various programs that are available to your employees. And I will go through some of those, but I'm not going to start with a definition of the various programs. What I'd like to start with is what I refer to as the preparatory phase, that every leader in every organization needs to be engaged with their team on before they make decisions around what programs they're going to apply for, what programs make sense for their organization, and most importantly, for the people that are working within their organization. The programs that you may have thought were the right ones 3 weeks ago might not be working for your team today. So understanding that preparatory phase and how to navigate through that is absolutely important. So I'm going to give some overview there, and then I'm going to move into the mental health considerations, the health and safety considerations for your employees as you're navigating through the change in the way we're doing work. And all of the uncertainty associated with the timelines that go along with the changes that we're dealing with. And then what I want to do is kind of close off and get some better perspective from you about what you're experiencing and some of the questions that you might have. So I don't want this to be me talking at you. I certainly want, please feel free to raise your hand and say when you want to chat, or use the chat feature that we'll be monitoring. Lynn is going to hold me accountable to make sure that I'm giving people an opportunity to speak if I don't see your hand raised or I don't see your question in the chat. So please do that. So I'm going to get started with the preparatory phase. What that really is, it's about sitting down with your leadership team, whoever they may be within your organization, and saying, okay, so what do we need to consider? What's the financial runway that we have from a business perspective? How are we going to be able to support and maintain our workforce? And what are the key considerations that we need to take into consideration as it pertains to the critical roles in the organization to keep the wheels on the bus? So what I mean by that are, what are the projects that you've got going on now? What's the critical work that you need to keep working on now? And then what are the other components of work that can either be paused or retooled to help you pivot, if you will, and start working in a different way in order to continue your business operations, whatever that may be. Once you've had that discussion with your leadership team, the next critical point is to go and sit down with your employees and find out what's going on for them. So from an essential service consideration, who's able to continue to work and who is not able to continue to work, based on their personal circumstance. So do they have immunocompromised folks at home that then they, them working in an essential service capacity may put somebody at home at risk? Early days, we had circumstances where people were trying to homeschool their children while the educational institutions were trying to get their programs together so that they could pivot and offer a new type of educational support for the kids. So these folks were trying to navigate that, as well as navigating remote work circumstances, or in some cases, one of the parents or adults supporting the family in the household might have been an essential service worker who was having to come in and out of the home and navigate that. All of those different personal circumstances need to be taken into consideration, and obviously done in a manner in which, some people are more forthcoming about that than others. They're a little bit more private, but to ensure that you have a process in place that you've discussed as a leadership team as to how you're going to engage with your teams and understand what's going on with them personally. That should be done before you make any decisions around what government support programs are going to be most appropriate for you. Because what might work for some might not work for others. And if you start navigating down a road and then having to quickly course correct afterward, it's going to be far more troublesome for your team and difficult for them to adjust. So understanding who needs what. And in some cases, we've seen employees volunteer to either, early days, it was being temporarily laid off, and now we know that there's not an obligation for you to lay off. People can apply to the CERB, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But some people were volunteering because their personal circumstances were such that it was better for them to self-select out and focus on the things that they needed to be focusing on in their private lives. Or financially, they were fine, and they understood that the organization they worked for was trying to navigate finances as best they could, and people were putting their hands up and saying, hey, you know what, if somebody's got to go for a period of weeks, I'm okay to do that because financially I can, and so on. But knowing that in advance as a leadership team is super helpful, because then you're not making assumptions on behalf of people, and you're then able to create a more customized program for your particular workforce. So as we all know, the various options that are available when you're dealing with impact to your business, to the revenue, there are key things. There's the layoff, temporary layoff, and we'll just park that for a moment. And then there's the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB that you're hearing everyone talk about, the 16-week support for employees. There's the wage subsidy that employers can apply for. Employees do not apply for a wage subsidy. There's been some confusion around that. Employers apply for that, and they can get a subsidy of up to 75% of the employee's wages. And that the qualifier for that is that your revenue's been reduced by at least 15%. The goal is to keep your employees in the workforce working, and ideally you're maintaining their pre-pandemic salary where possible, and then you're receiving a supplemental benefit for the wage subsidy. The other program that's available is something called a work sharing agreement, and that's a three-party agreement. So it's between the employer, the employees who must be voluntarily willing to participate, and with Service Canada, where you're registering the work sharing program. And what that does is for up to 38 weeks, you can have employees in what's called a work sharing unit, where they're performing similar or dependent work. And within that work sharing unit, all of those employees are reducing their hours of work by the same percentage of time. And then EI will supplement the remaining amount up to 75% of the employee's wages. The other piece that's been very confusing for employers and that we've been monitoring quite closely is something called the Supplemental Unemployment Benefit Program. Many employers have that kind of program in place where they're providing a supplemental wage amount up to a certain percentage that they determine that goes to a maximum of 95% of the employee's salary. So EI will, if somebody's on maternity or parental leave, or if they're on sick leave, it's been introduced in some organizations for a sick leave program, they'll receive their maximum entitlements under EI, and then the employer will supplement the remaining amount from the maximum EI of 55% up to 95% of the employee's salary. The condition with the Supplemental Unemployment Benefit Program is that employees may not work while they're receiving that supplemental benefit. So some employers are using that program in order to retain employees who may be under financial duress, if you will, if they were to simply be receiving the EI portion. So early days before the CERB came into play, employers were navigating what they had at their disposal, which was really these key programs. What's become confusing is that the initial response was that employers were following the process for temporarily laying off their employees. Now, a temporary layoff in Ontario is up to 13 weeks, and you can get an extension to 35 weeks only if you maintain the employees' benefit programs that were in place previously. Those conditions have since been removed as the government's been navigating this, and you are not required now to temporarily lay off your employees. You can go right to the CERB, and employees can then apply for the CERBs through their CRA account and receive the CERB where they qualify for that 16-week. Prime Minister Trudeau announced yesterday that previously employees could not be earning any other income while they were receiving the CERB. As of yesterday, employees can earn up to $1,000 a month and still be fully qualifiable for the CERB benefit. So that's allowing the piece where employers were saying, well, you know, we've still got some work for our employees, and we want to be able to keep them engaged with the workforce and increase those hours of work as we go forward. However, the moment we would assign some work and want to be paying our employees for doing that work, then it would disqualify them for the government support that was available to them. So a lot of feedback was taken into consideration in that regard, and they are now changing course and ensuring that employees can still work a few hours and receive the CERB benefit. As I understand it, Prime Minister Trudeau is speaking while we're on this webinar and providing his latest update. And we anticipate that we're going to be hearing more around what the supplemental benefit program is going to be for employees who are considered supporting emergency services and are making less than $2,500 a month. So there's something to come out today, a little bit more detail about that. And also we anticipate a little bit more detail around the $1,000 a month, being able to work work and get paid up to $1,000 a month and still receive the CERB benefit. So understanding your workforce and what their needs are is critically important for you to be able to plan and check in. What we're seeing is the employers who are navigating this in a way that is being really appreciated by their teams are the employers who are checking in on the programs that are in place on a monthly basis with their teams. So personal resiliency and mental health well-being is a challenge for everyone right now. Pretty much every organization has had to retool the way its employees are working. No matter where you look, you know, either there's the remote work consideration for organizations who perform that kind of work, even essential services, where there, you know, even folks working in grocery stores and so on. The way people are working has changed, and that's created some strain and also personal circumstances whereby, you know, people are working at home, the entire family is at home, and people are trying to navigate this. There are limits to which some people can tolerate that amount of change, and they need to have the opportunity to make different decisions and engage in a dialogue with their employers about, hey, you know what, I need to go to part-time hours for, you know, the next X number of weeks because I need to pull back, or you know, my mental health is suffering. I have significant levels of anxiety. I need some support around that. So employers need to be able to engage in those discussions in a way that's going to be compliant, obviously, to various employment legislation. So making sure that you're following the proper compliance rules for the Employment Standards Act, but also more importantly, making sure that you are respecting your duty to accommodate medical, what is considered a medical condition that needs to be accommodated during this time. I'm going to share with you some real world scenarios that are real life scenarios that we're seeing happen. So a few things. We're seeing very, very high levels of anxiety. And there are some people who have just said, you know what, I'm too nervous to come into the workplace, recognizing that my work environment is an essential service, recognizing that the employer has put all of the safety practices in place that need to be put in place. I'm still too anxious to come into work. I need to self-select out. I'm afraid of contracting COVID-19, or I've got an elderly parent that I've got at home with me, and I'm afraid of coming in and out of the household, etc. I need to self-select out. Employers are having to navigate those kinds of conversations and circumstances quite carefully because they do have a duty to accommodate. Employees do have a right to an unpaid protected leave under the Employment Standards Act. And also, that's what the CERB is there for. And we're also seeing some circumstances where more entry-level employees whose income is not seriously impacted compared to what their regular income is and what they would be making on the CERB. There are employees who are saying, you know what, I'm nervous, this is putting me at risk. I would qualify for the CERB, I'm going to apply for the CERB, and I'm not going to come to work. We recognize that is incredibly, incredibly frustrating for employers who are already trying to navigate under very difficult circumstances and work through these situations with a limited workforce. But to not allow those employees to be able to apply for the CERB and take that protected leave is creating a risk for that employer, not only in the short term from an employment law standpoint, but also in the longer term. Because how you engage with your team now and the measures that you put in place and the flexibility that you demonstrate in trying to understand the individual circumstances and manage the or create a balance between the operational requirements and the requirements of individuals on the team, that's going to pay it forward for you in the long run. That's going to set the tone in terms of the the manner in which the team feels that there's a level of trust and safety and how they can engage in those very difficult conversations with you as an employer. And also, it'll pay it forward from a retention standpoint when we start gradually getting back into whatever the new normal of business is, and your employees will be willing to still be with you and not mitigate risk and look for employment elsewhere. One of the most alarming things that I've heard that's happened in an organization was that they were informing their team that in order to cut some of the costs and to recover some of the revenue that they were starting to see that they were losing and anticipated would continue to lose, they had an all-staff meeting with the team, and they informed the employees that they would need to continue to work their full-time schedule, and when submitting their timesheets for that week, that they would be required to submit for a day of vacation. So just for clarity purposes, they were required to work, in that case, they worked a 40-hour work week, to work the 40-hour work week and then also say that they were taking a day of vacation. The employer was doing this to lower its vacation balances, and it was informing its employees that if they didn't do that, that they were then at risk of being laid off. So the employer created a circumstance whereby the employee was placed under duress to, in a non-voluntary capacity, give up their paid entitlements of vacation, which they had earned but had not yet taken, and that the employer was anticipating some layoffs. Now, fast forwarding that, if an employer is not able to recall an employee from a temporary layoff, the employer has an obligation to pay out whatever entitlements the employee has earned but not yet taken. Vacation is an entitlement that's under the Employment Standards Act. So that employer was taking measures to reduce its liability in the event that it was not able to recall those employees from that temporary layoff. That's incredibly problematic. First and foremost, it's not something that they can legally do. And secondly, that was incredibly damaging to the morale in that organization. And the employees are all now operating not only under very difficult circumstances that everybody's operating under because of the pandemic, but also fearful and now looking for employment elsewhere. So that's kind of one of those worst case scenarios of what not to do, and looking, as to how that might impact the organization on a go-forward basis when it comes time to recover and get back to business as usual. Those employees, how they were treated during this pandemic is going to really determine whether or not they're going to choose to remain employed with that employer. So leading from the heart, really focusing on the needs, the individual needs of each and every member of your team, finding a way to continue to tap into that and understand what it is that they need will help you make some decisions around, what's the work that we have available? How does that align with the revenue that's coming into our organization? How might we retool some of the jobs to pivot, to keep people employed, but also focusing on other things? And when do we need to bring people in and out of the organization? And then subsequent to that, how do we communicate that back to the team on a regular basis so they understand exactly where we're at and what we're doing, and that we're remaining connected there? It's hugely important. There are a number of supports that are available to employees now who are finding themselves working remotely, and they've kind of had this makeshift workstation at home. Ensuring that your employees are working in a safe and healthy manner is absolutely critical. We all know that. but it doesn't have to break the bank. So Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, WSPS, is a not-for-profit organization that supports all industries on hazard prevention programs and workplace safety. Their website has some excellent resource material around setting up your workstation so that it is ergonomically safe. We're seeing a lot of concern from both employees and employers, whereby employers are saying, you know what, I don't see an end in sight to this work from home thing. My workstation at home is not properly set up. And now employers are saying, what's our obligation financially to ensure that our employees' workstations are ergonomically equipped? And my response to that is employees need to be given the resources to assess the safety of their work environment. And so making sure that they have access to stuff like what we see on Workplace Safety and Prevention's website. And then helping them understand that it doesn't mean you've got to buy a $500 chair in order to be working safely. There are things that we have in our home that we can use to make some modifications to the height of our screen, you know, books under a monitor, books under your feet to make sure that you're at the proper height and so on. And to make sure that you've got a short-term plan in place until such time as the leadership team in every organization can regroup and say, okay, do we have a work from home policy? Financially, what do we support and ensure that every employee has available to them in order to be doing remote work? And how are we phasing that in? So how are we making sure that we can actually afford to do this, because now this is being placed upon us at a time where we're already worried about, or most organizations are worried about, you know, revenue and where that's at. How do we then choose what is most effective and most important for our employees? Again, that comes down to having a dialogue with the employees, managing the expectations, understanding what your position is, what your policy is, and making sure that you're consistently applying that policy. And also course correcting. If you've missed something or you thought something was going to work early days and it's not working now, again, as leaders, leading from the heart and understanding, you know what, you're not going to have all the answers. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time. And making sure that you recognize when you do need to course correct, and course correct will set the tone for your team, and it'll buy that loyalty and trust that is so needed in this kind of circumstance. For the essential service workforces, so the folks that are having to get into a car or a truck and drive to where they're going, and you know, some of our bus drivers and so on, making sure that those individuals are equipped with information if they're ever stopped or questioned by a bylaw enforcement officer or a police officer, or even as they're interacting, you know, we're seeing some heightened levels of anxiety and frustration in members of the public who are kind of calling people out on things, is equipping your employees with a procedure to follow should they come into circumstances where it feels like they may be questioned. You know, do you have a right to be working? Why are you working? What are you doing? What are the safety measures that you're putting in place? So having a written documentation that every employee has around why your business qualifies as an essential service, what safety practices are put in place, who to call in the organization, who's the primary contact should there be any concerns. And so you're giving your employees an opportunity to be able to disengage from any conflict, and you're protecting their health and their safety, and they know how to redirect that, and making sure that those standard operating procedures are updated and communicated to your employees as you're navigating these circumstances and as things are changing, making sure that they know exactly what's expected of them and exactly how you're going to support them through this. And finally, in terms of the layoffs and the CERB, there's a whole bunch of different examples. Suling was talking earlier about, you know, as we navigate this and we're operationalizing these programs into the various workforces, we're seeing that there are, of course, some gaps. That makes total sense that that's going to happen. But one of the biggest concerns that we're monitoring right now, and we're talking to our business partners and employment law firms in the city, is that early days when employers did what they were supposed to do and they temporarily laid off their employees, they followed the proper procedure to temporarily lay them off and give them a letter and so on. Under the Employment Standards Act, it's very explicit that temporary layoff is for up to 13 weeks, and then it can be extended up to 35 if you maintain benefits. That countdown is still counting down for those employers who did the temporary layoffs, despite the fact that anybody who was temporarily laid off and had applied for and was receiving EI would be transferred over to the CERB, to the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Despite all of that, we still have this anomaly out there where we don't have guidance and information for employers about what to do under their obligations, which remain intact under the Employment Standards Act, by which if they are not able to recall those employees at the end of that 13-week period, they must pay them their entitlements for termination pay. And so we're continuing to raise that as a concern, and we're looking for guidance from the Ministry of Labour about what we can do and what we can advise employers who have taken the action to temporarily lay off their employees. As this has been navigating, as we've been navigating this, the government, the Canadian government, has taken the stand that employers do not have to go through the steps of doing a temporary layoff now. They can ask their employees to apply for the CERB. Employers are still required to issue a record of employment so that employees have that information when they go, or that information is in the system when the employee goes to apply for the benefit. Previously, employers would have to give the temporary layoff letter and the record of employment. And of course, the reason code on the record of employment needs to be reflective of the circumstance. So if it is for a shortage of work, then the reason code for shortage of work is A. And if an employee is choosing, earlier when I gave those examples, there's some employers saying, I'm self-selecting out, I'm too nervous, I'm fearful, or I'm concerned that you know, I may contract COVID, or I have these other folks I'm caring for at home. If an employee is choosing not to come to work, then the record of employment should say one of two things. Either the employee has quit, resigned, if that's what the employee has said they've done, or in the majority of the cases, the code to be used is N as in November, which is for the leave of absence. So these things are then properly tracked in the system. And when the folks at Service Canada are reviewing this, they have an understanding based on the code used in the record of employment, what's transpired in the workplace and the rationale behind it. There's been a tremendous amount of confusion about what code to put in depending on what circumstance. So that's high level from me in terms of some of the things that we've been observing in the workplace. And but what I want to do is I want to hear from you. So what questions do you have?
So Karen, I'm going to interject here for just a moment,
Sure.
give you a chance to take a breather. We're going to go into Q&As very shortly. I'm sure everyone has some very specific and targeted questions that they want to ask Karen, but I want to take a moment, first of all, to once again thank Karen and all of our presenters. The people that have come forward and offered to do these webinars for us are taking time out of their busy schedules, out of running their own businesses to help Ottawa's business community. So I see, in addition to Karen, I actually see a past webinar presenter. Candace is on our call today, and we have a couple of folks that are upcoming speakers. Graham Burkhamhead is on, and so is Ron Smith. Ron is not actually going to present, but some of his colleagues at RBC will. So what we have upcoming for the business community is the following. On the 21st, Graham is going to lead one called Leading a Virtual Team. So this is not about the technology of having a team that's virtual. It's how do you lead and engage your virtual team. On the 23rd, we're going to have Andrea Greenhouse from Vision to Voice Communications talk about internal communications, how to talk with your team, and how to keep them engaged. On the 28th, we're going to have Stratford managers talk about the 5 stages of disaster recovery. I think that's going to be very popular. And on the 30th, this one is very near and dear to my heart. We're going to have an inspiring webinar. We're going to talk to Carla Briones, Steve Cody, and Su-Ling Ching about what it's like to lead an organization during this COVID crisis, and the kind of innovative things that they've come up with to keep their organizations moving strong. And on Tuesday, May the 5th, we're going to have RBC, BDC, and EDC come together on a topic, we're calling it Accessing Capital. So if you have questions for these organizations about how to go through the process of accessing capital for your business, this is the webinar that you're going to want to attend. And we also have on May 7th, coming up with Business Sherpa Group, a slightly different look at employment issues. Their topic will be the opportunities and challenges in today's talent market, today being COVID-19 today. And I'm also extremely thrilled and excited to announce that we are starting another webinar series. We're calling it Wellness Wednesdays. So the Ottawa Board of Trade is absolutely committed to the idea that our economic recovery and rebound is closely tied to the health and well-being of people. And so our Wellness Wednesdays webinars are going to start on Wednesday, May the 6th. And our very first guest is going to be St. John's Ambulance, and they are going to talk about mental health first aid and why this is so important. I think this is the perfect audience to share this news with for the first time. I'm very, very excited about it. So we're looking forward to continuing to offer these programs for our members and for the business community generally. So a thank you, Karen, for doing this webinar today. Thank you to the Ottawa Citizen, who is our community partner. Thank you also to Enbridge Gas, who supports the activities that we do, and also to Media Mall Marketing, who has helped us with the technology, getting our webinar series going. So now that Karen has had a little bit of a break from all of that wonderful information, let's go into questions. Is anyone going to lead off by asking the first question? Don't be shy, folks.
I'll go ahead and ask something. It's Robin here. So Karen, maybe it's a bit of a clarification. I'm under one of the circumstances you talked about, and that I temporarily laid off 2 of my employees. And I've been really worried about just what you said. They're great people. I'd like to bring them back, and I'm worried about that 13-week date. You said you can sometimes get an extension to 35 weeks. Could you clarify that a little bit? I'll be honest, we're a small company. We don't really provide much in the way of benefits. Would I be able to get that?
Yeah, so what they've done is that they've removed the requirement to maintain those benefits during that 35-week period. And we're looking for more information from the government about what it means to ensure that, like, we need some very direct language that provides us with that assurance that, you know, you're not going to get surprised at some point that you haven't followed through on your obligations to inform your employees that they haven't been recalled. I anticipate we're going to have some more language to that effect. Certainly the employment law firms in the city are very focused on it, and they're bringing that forward. I've seen letters written to the Minister of Labour, to Premier Ford. They're really advocating for some clarity on that. So, you know, these are extenuating circumstances, and I think there's going to be some, certainly some forgiveness. If you're saying, look, you know what, I've followed due process. I've done everything that I'm supposed to do. You know, I want to make sure that my employees still qualify for the programs, the employment support through EI, because once they've exhausted their 16 weeks of CERB, then if they're still unemployed, then they'll be rolled into EI. The important piece here is the timing of when they applied for EI. And what we're seeing now, and I was making some notes because this is kind of like a moving target, but if it was prior to March 15th, then they would be receiving, they would be in the EI pool and not moved over to CERB. And the differentiator there is CERB is $500 a week and EI is up to $573 a week, right? Yeah. So you're getting just a bit more under EI than you would under the CERB. And I'm hoping I didn't get my numbers wrong there. All of these numbers are moving so much. But so if they were prior to March 15th, they're going to get the greater amount, the maximum entitlements if they made more than those maximum earnings. They'll get the maximum entitlements under EI. If they applied after that, they're going to be put into the CERB program, and they're going to need to exhaust that 16 weeks of CERB before they're moved into the EI program. So yeah, it's one of those unfortunate, we need to wait and see moments around that recall period, but it's certainly the one that's keeping me up at night the most. Yeah, because we don't
stay tuned.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks,
so
Rob.
Karen, I've had a couple of questions come in by chat. The first one is from Susan, and the question is about reducing hours. It seems harder for some to work a full day. She gives the example of living in a small apartment, and I hear you on that one. How does that work, and how does that work with respect to pay? So I'll just leave that up to you to answer.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. Thanks for asking that question, Susan. It's one of the things that I did want to discuss. You know, we're seeing that more and more, that people thought, okay, I can do this in the short term, but on the long term, like I can't do this. If an employee volunteers to reduce their hours, then you definitely want to engage with them in a conversation about that. So what does that look like for them? Set the parameters and make sure you understand how long might that be for, what are they agreeing to, have them follow up with something in writing to you so that you're sure you're clear on what they're volunteering to do. And then you would want to respond in writing, because you would be changing the terms and conditions of their employment, right? So you've got an employment contract in place. You'd want to be following up with a letter that confirms that, you know, you've requested a reduction in hours. We're going to be doing it for a period of 4 weeks, and your salary will be adjusted accordingly. And also the other thing to consider is if you've got a group benefits program, make sure that you're not reducing the hours below the minimum requirement to maintain participation in the group benefits program, because the group benefits would be reduced typically as well to the hours of work. So you want it to come to you in writing, and you want to respond in writing and make sure that that there's absolute clarity on that, and that you're checking in. And my recommendation would be to do it for shorter periods rather than longer periods, so that you're making yourself accountable for checking in more frequently because circumstances are changing so rapidly, right? The other option that's available to you, potentially if you qualify for the wage subsidy, the wage subsidy can go up to 75% of the employee's salary. One of the creative options that we've come up with for some of our clients is that you might want to decide to go down the wage subsidy route and reduce the employee's hours of for a period of time, and then you're receiving some wage subsidy for that as well. Again, that needs to be voluntary on behalf of your employee needs to be volunteering for that as well. But if you're already receiving the wage subsidy, you can reduce the hours and do that, and also that's kind of a benefit for you as well, because you'll potentially at some point soon be getting some money back on that one.
Thank you, Karen. Susan doesn't actually have a microphone, so she may submit a follow-up question. But for now, I'm going to move on to Kristen's question. Kristen's question is, a local radio station has temporarily laid off employees and reduced the compensation of employees while requiring them to work full hours. Employees are concerned of further layoffs and therefore are complacent with these new employment terms. Is this action permissible in regards to employment law?
I want full disclosure. I'm not an employment lawyer, so I certainly am not in a position to provide any legal advice. I would want to recommend that the individual speak with an employment lawyer who represents employees. Some employment lawyers represent only employers, some represent only employees, some represent both. So finding someone that represents employees to ensure that they're getting the proper advice from a legal expert. But that sounds like it's not aligned with employment standards. Radio stations, are they working for a broadcaster? That's full context there. That something that is not aligned with employment law, and that they will certainly call that out. It's one of those unfortunate examples that it's placing employees under duress. Do this or else, and that's not an approach that's going to be seen well or under the eyes of the courts.
And do we have any other questions for Karen? I have a question I'd like to ask. Out of all of the clients that you've been talking to lately, is there any one organization, not to name names, but who has really done it right? Who got it right without even having to, confer with you? Is somebody doing anything really unusual or very creative, and just, you'd like to share that sort of tactic with everybody?
Yeah. Actually, there's a new client that contacted us because of the circumstances surrounding the pandemic. Called us early days. They are an organization that is part of the world of the airline industry. So we all know how heavily hit that industry has been hit. And they called because they wanted to do it the right way by their employees and focus in on making sure that each and every employee in their organization, is about a 20-person organization, and they wanted to make sure that they were able to support everybody. And we engaged in some brainstorming around how they might utilize all of the programs. And this is an organization that has that was looking at the temporary layoffs, but because of its innovative approach, we're able to maintain all of their employees' employment without laying them off by using all of the programs I talked about, each and every one of them, and they've been navigating them and changing them on a monthly basis. As revenue's coming in, they're bringing more people in. And so while some might be employed this month, they might not be employed next month, but they know that this is happening and they're organically adjusting this. So they're using the CERB, they're using the wage subsidy, they're using the work sharing. We've registered the work sharing program for them. They've got some people on a supplemental unemployment benefit program. They have done it right. And their communication strategy with their employees and going back and having a two-way dialogue has been absolutely exceptional. So it's been a pleasure to watch them navigate that and to see the response from the team. It's textbook best practice.
What a great case study too for future,
yeah,
to show the right way to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
and I hope they're listening, because they'll know.
Do we have any further questions for Karen this morning? So I think, other than some nice comments that are starting to come in, I think we have covered everyone's questions. I'm absolutely sure that if anyone comes up with a question later, Karen will be happy to answer it for you, just because of the type of person that she is. And Susan rightly pointed out, she did a great job with a wired mouth. So I have to tell everybody, I'm going to say this out loud, Karen. Karen has her jaw wired shut.
Oh, yeah.
And she was still willing to do this presentation. And quite frankly, if I hadn't known that her jaw was wired shut, I don't think I would have been able to tell. And so, wow, and thank you for doing this while your mouth is got all kinds of things going on in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the wires coming off tomorrow, and I'm going to eat the biggest poutine known to man.
Atta girl, good for you. I can't think of a better way to end the week. So thank you very much, everybody. And we will send, of course, the link to the webinar out as soon as we get it hosted on our website. If you want to catch up on some of the webinars we've already hosted, including Candace's on managing cash flow, you can see them at ottawabot.ca/webinars, and they're all there. You can watch them at your leisure. So thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful day.